Good morning. Welcome to AbbeyCast and this podcast in which I'm going to interview Andrew Del Rossi, the new director of our Spirituality Center, and in particular his interest in and work with the works of the great Jesuit paleontologist and mystic Teilhard de Chardin. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
We are lucky to have you with us. And so let's just jump into the deep end of the pool. And first of all, tell our listeners and watchers something about yourself.
That's always a tough question. Very tired right now. As I was just telling Father Andrew, I was up early with two small children this morning. So a teething 1-year-old makes for an early morning. But I have this interest in Teilhard de Chardin, like Andrew said, the paleontologist and mystic. And I hope to be able to share that with people. It's something I've been doing for the past few years now through presentations and workshops I've given, and those opportunities seem to be coming a little bit more frequently nowadays, which I'm very grateful for. So, it's all about being able to share the larger message of Teilhard's life and work, which is really what he was all about. He was not about, this is my work, this is my message, but this was, the great human work that we all participate in. So now I kind of feel called as well to do that. There's a little bit of a pressure to do it, especially.
Well, let's. You didn't learn about Teilhard in grade school, right?
No.
So give folks just a little bit, background of where you're coming from.
Sure. Well, now as you say that question, it took me back and flashback, and I'm thinking, I think I did. Because when I was in grade school, I had a proclivity for a lot of subjects, but I really felt drawn to science, and I would think it was the hands-on component and doing experiments and being able to go outside. It was always nice to leave, the indoor classroom, but it was that engagement with the world that I really enjoyed, and learning things that way, learning more about this thing that you just look at, learning all these components and levels. So when my brain changed somewhere probably around puberty, I started to drift in the direction more towards writing and things like that, and the mathematical, analytical side didn't get as much attention. So, naturally with subjects like algebra, I started to lose a taste for that science that was becoming more numbers-based.
Kind of more material.
Exactly, with chem and stuff like that became more numbers-based. But I've always thought about how I really liked that. So when I found Teilhard, after having studied religion and gotten a degree in that undergrad, I was studying for my master's degree, just a general the master's degree in religious studies at the time. I really didn't have my focus.
Where were you doing that?
So this was at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, and I was taking a class on, I believe it was Psyche and Spirit, or it may have been Addiction and Spirituality, the 12 Steps. But I said to my professor, have you ever heard of this guy, Teilhard de Chardin? And I probably stumbled through his name, and he just looked me square in the eye and said, that's your guy. So I got The Phenomenon of Man. That was my introduction to his work.
Great.
And worked through that enough to have it eventually be the focus of my master's thesis. So,
going back to the beginning of what you said, it's interesting. You said, this interest you had in outside and nature, etc., and that if we read in the biography of Teilhard the same thing, that he was interested in the stones and the rocks, etc. So that we have a lot of times we realize later that there was something going on there in the past that really was preparing us for what came later.
Yeah, I often think of like Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, who talks about chasing your bliss, right? Finding your bliss and pursuing it. And a lot of times we're just in that joyful, blissful state when we're children.
Right.
And it's so natural to us, right?
Yeah.
In Teilhard's story, we see this clear progression from his obsession at first with rocks and different materials, metals and things like that held a certain permanence in his eyes, right? Because they wouldn't break, they wouldn't go away, they wouldn't waver. but over time he saw these things would get brittle or rust.
Yeah.
And that really continued through his life, through going into formation, then in education, and then his work in the field. But I think about my own life, and it was like how I feel like I got disconnected from that at some point,
Right.
Because when I come back to his work now, I'm like, especially in raising children now, having these flashbacks almost of like, oh, I remember this from being a kid, and this feeling of why this was so connecting for me.
Yeah. We may have jumped too fast, too far, in the sense of just give the folks, a brief biography of Teilhard for those who may be hearing about him for the first time.
Sure. You summed him up nicely in your introduction. French, Jesuit, paleontologist. He was a priest within the Society of Jesus. And he was an academic, he was a traveler, he was a stretcher bearer in the French army in the First World War. I believe he was initially called on to be a chaplain given his religious formation, but if my memory serves me correctly, I read that he wanted engagement with the cutting edge, so to speak, of whatever that effort was that humanity, the French regiment, wasn't trying to achieve. He wanted to be part of that. So, that led him to ducking under machine gun fire and stuff to recover soldiers off the battlefield. So really a Renaissance person in that way. And he had friends in many different circles, from the scientific circles to the religious to the artistic, political even. So he was a very connected person. He experienced some challenge, to put it lightly. He was a young, budding academic. He was known as this very dynamic lecturer in Paris, and eventually he fell under, I don't want to say suspicion or concern of the Jesuits, because someone read in a personal journal of his, which somehow someone found in one of these drawers tucked away in his desk, right, that he was calling into question the scientific aspect of original sin, and how this single couple is kind of a scientific anomaly, in so much that if we're going to say that these two people committed this error, right? So not discrediting that theological concept or seeking to disprove it, but just really calling in to the bigger perspective, like how this fits in, and especially because I think for so many people with their faith life, that's a hard thing to work with, this concept of original sin, right? I know people like Matthew Fox have come with this concept of original blessing, trying to introduce a new way, but it's no coincidence, I think, that that's what initially brought some suspicion to him. But he was really ahead of his time when it came to his views on evolution. He's seen as being prophetic when it comes to him or his writing about the noosphere, which, if you think about the Earth's evolution, there are all these layers of development, from the inorganic to organic levels of all the elements that come to form the geosphere, and then there's the aquasphere on top of that, the layer of water on top of the layer of land, and then eventually you have the biosphere where life forms. Beyond the biosphere, you have this notion of a noosphere. It's a layer of mind. It's indicative in the way we are so easily able to connect with people through global communications now. Zoom, things like that have become so prevalent now, right? And he saw this all unfolding, way ahead of its time, in so much that he was observing phenomenon in nature like ant colonies or beehives, and he saw that there is this social inclination that we have. Not just the different species within evolution has, but evolution itself has, to aggregate and draw together in so much that a larger organism can form from that, right? So he sees the internet as being something that's going to really propel humanity's evolution.
Well, I mean, he didn't see the internet.
No, but this eventual layer of connectivity.
The internet, in a sense, we might say, is the part of the fulfillment of a prophecy. That we go from the biosphere, the life spheres, that life now is that just as life is universal, there will be this connection of mind and spirit that is universal.
That's right. Yeah. And now these ideas that he's developing, they're not all taking place at once. This is over the course of many years. This is over the course of the war. After the war, he finds himself eventually in China in a kind of de facto exile where, because of the heat he was experiencing, we could say, because of his dynamic work, he was told, well, you go to China and you do your scientific research and you publish about bones and rocks and stuff, but you don't write anything about spirituality.
Yeah.
So that was the situation he found himself in, and he eventually, after many years in China, found his way back to the United States, where he eventually died in New York City. But it was a really, like I said, dynamic life that he lived, really a Renaissance person, and being connected to so many different sorts of people in different spheres. He was someone that had a truly, I think, multidimensional perspective on reality, right? So often we get pigeonholed into one perspective, but he was seeing it from so many angles. I think the scientific angle was really key for him because, we hear about like the cloud of unknowing, right? And we come to a closer relationship with God by unknowing in a way. For Teilhard, it was through knowing that he came to know God more, a closer relationship with God, because through his analysis of the way evolution was moving and how the molecules and atoms all played a role within this conscious process, it was clear that it was all one.
Yeah. I think that there are a number of things that impress me. So, for example, what you said a little while back, that he chose to be a stretcher bearer rather than a chaplain. So he was really, with the blood and guts, and yet out of that comes some incredible writing that is in a sense optimistic, that he had this ability. I think I connected with that evolution was key for him, and that when evolution is occurring, things are being upset, and there's a kind of push against what is new. And I mean, by that light, if what we're going through right now with the pandemic and politics, we might be able to say that we are actually on the brink of a major evolutionary jump forward.
Absolutely. It's, in so many different ways of saying it is, this turn of an epoch, is the shift to a new paradigm, is the fall of Babylon, whatever you want to call it, right? We are seeing a new order come in here, and that's what is very interesting to me right now, because there's a lot of talk about a biopharma security state where we're going to have our check marks and everything to show that we're clear. And for Teilhard, that might be part of it. Technology is part of our evolution, but it is not our final evolution. It's ultimately an evolution of our heart. Right. And in my eyes, it's like all that tech is really cool, and I'm not, against science or anything like that. But when we skip this level of affect and humanness that we really have not tapped or encouraged or nurtured within society, but I think that's where his hope came from, was seeing that love was this powerful force within the universe. He says it's the most powerful, but it's also the most mysterious force. To wrap our heads around it is an impossibility. It's only to live it and experience it. So that's where his hope came from, was this deep relationship he had with Christ that he really forged in the war. He sees nothing but chaos and destruction in front of him, yet he also sees the troops moving in ways that represent these natural patterns, like the ant colonies and things like that, as to say that humanity is such a powerful organism that human energy is an even greater force, he says, than technological energy, right? That we can achieve so much through that, but when we really unite as a human family, as a human species, that's when we unlock capacities we never knew we had.
And I think that, as you talk about that, the heart and love, I think that what made him such a conundrum was, scientists working on evolution are not talking about love, and spiritual writers are not talking about Peking man, but he could put all of these together in a theology, geology, paleontology, evolution, and in a kind of synthesis that, I mean, I have to say for myself, it's tough to understand. But
Me too.
Yeah, I see where he's going with that, and I think he's, I think that he's right on target, and so far ahead of his time.
Oh yeah, and he challenged science to say we need studies that measure the amount of love in the universe, on the planet Earth, things like that. He has this concept of ultraphysics. And it's not just quantum physics or Newtonian physics or metaphysics; it's all of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we take all of that and integrate that into an even more holistic system? Right. So he's thinking many ages ahead here, probably even than where we are now, of course.
Yeah.
But it came from his experience with struggle, his experience with personal doubts with depression, physical illness, things like that. So he knew very much what it was to be human. He didn't seek his spirituality by removing himself from the world. He actually sought to do that at first in the First World War. He was just so traumatized by the horror of it. He finds himself praying, and he's just being thrown back into the elementary stages of the universe, where he's identifying with like atoms and quarks and things like that, right?
Yeah.
But he's like, no, this is disconnected. It's not in relationship in the way that the world I know it is now is, right? Yeah. So he's propelled into the present, and then that really launches him to have this great vision of the future. He talks a lot about distinction between a God of the above and a God of the ahead. And he said, for too long we've been concerned about this God of the above, or institutionalized religion has been concerned about that. Well, really, the mystical vision is to see this God of the ahead on the horizon.
Yeah, and so that God of the ahead is pushing and pulling us somewhere. Where is that? What does he call that place?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it too, in terms of pushing and pulling. That's what Teilhard calls the omega point.
Right.
So this is what we could call the end of history. We could call this in the tech/transhuman community, it's often referred to as the singularity. But Teilhard's omega point is, like I said, totally holistic, in so much in that it's not just a technological singularity. It's all in all, as is referred to within the scriptures, right? This omega point comes from the scriptural reference to Christ as being the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And in Teilhard's eyes, or eventually in Teilhard's eyes, he came to this realization that this point that he saw, he sensed, the intuited evolution moving toward, was the same point that he was striving to move toward in his faith life, that he saw the religious tradition moving toward, that he was encountering within the gospel, and then encountering within scripture, and then encountering within the world. So it was kind of within this mystical act of physical presence, yet also inflection, upon his faith life, upon scriptures, that he's able to see they're taking us to one and the same point.
So should we be expecting that to happen soon?
In some ways, it's already happening,
Right.
But it's going to be sooner than later. I mean, it starts to sound a little bit wacky when we start to say, well, it's going to be on, December 21st, 2020, or whatever the lunar eclipse will be, right? But it's something that we are a part of now. It's unfolding. It's becoming. It's the great collaboration that we are a part of in evolution.
I think it's like what we say about when the scripture talks about the fullness of the kingdom at the end of time. We say it is already and not yet.
Yes.
It has begun. Has been from the beginning of time, but it's still headed to a future.
And that's the beautiful thing about Teilhard, is that there's a call for all of us, like I kind of started with, to participate in it, because it's not his work. It's just, a perspective on the larger work that no matter what God we pray to, if we pray to a God at all, we're still a part of it, just by virtue of our existence here. Yeah. And, it's not like we all need to start up a nonprofit and have some great cause where we're, affecting, drugs of people. But just through our daily living, conscious relationships which are really with ourself. We have a conscious relationship with ourself and getting to know ourself and that constant unfolding, getting to know God, of course, but really within your relationships with other people.
Yeah.
Because for him, that was also where he was encountering God.
Yeah. So, so you've had this incredible education, and et cetera, and here you are as the director of center for the spirituality center at Daylesford Abbey, and you're doing filming and hanging the Advent wreath. And, I mean, so yeah, is that attention for you?
No, if anything, I think it. Well, yes, in a good way. Now, so maybe this will work in some of my other focus too. But I do a lot of work with psychology, in particular, like Jungian psychology, right? And in Jungian psychology, you essentially want attention. You want attention between your unconscious mind and your ego, your sense of I, your present sense of self, right? Because in keeping that tension, Jung says what happens is that a third or transcendent perspective kind of unexpectedly appears. Right? So I find myself, having this academic background and, kind of like I alluded to before, some more academic opportunities like speaking that are, coming about. But I have this opportunity here in terms of the Abbey where we have a living, breathing community of Norbertines and laity that are here, which is, I'm super grateful to be a part of while everyone's like virtual. It's like this is a living, breathing community where, we're making that work safely. And you have, that very hands-on live ministry of people in the pews on Sundays, albeit limited, or at home virtual. So for me, it's important to stay, connected to those different aspects of myself. I found that in my life when I kind of, put my weight heavily on one side or the other, that's when I personally become unbalanced and, and maybe not my best self. So, so yes, there is a tension with it, but it's a tension that I like to have, and all the new challenges that have been presented just in this job alone, in this role alone by COVID, all the pivoting we've had to do, they've been good. Stressful at times, for sure. But, at the end of the day, I feel like a good tired. It's been like a good workout, know. So.
I should say to those of you who are watching this, Andrew was hired to do marketing to bring more groups into the Spirituality Center, into the Abbey, because that's one of the ways that we support ourselves. And the day that he started was when we shut down the Spirituality Center for groups. But I think that, the Spirit had a plan there, because it's really enabled him to develop this Springhouse Media Ministry. And so it's been a really, really good thing. But sometimes I think to myself, I wonder if he'd rather be in a college or university teaching a class on Teilhard. But I think that he's getting that Teilhard's message across pretty well. I'm just beginning to do that in the center.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've been grateful for the opportunity to do that. When I was scouting around doctoral programs years ago, not all institutions, and I thought I was, inquiring to some pretty progressive places, yet also very traditional and founded, weren't open to an inquiry like I wanted. And it was somewhat interdisciplinary in that I was very intentionally looking to integrate the spirituality with the psychology. And that could have been a natural, a hindrance, but I just found that the path has opened as it has. And from LaSalle to here, it's been, a providential path. So
good.
Yeah.
All right. I think you have some resources that you want to share with the people about Teilhard?
I mean, whenever I give a presentation or a workshop or something like that, I'm often asked where people should start in reading Teilhard. So I'd be happy to share where.
Good.
And it's not so much where I think they should start, but this has been vetted by my mentors in the Teilhard world and those that I feel are much wiser and experienced than me. So, Phenomenon of Man, which is a seminal work, it's a lot of science. It's as I joke, like 3/4 science before you maybe even get a hint of spirituality or God or anything like that in there.
There's a slight because for example, if people are looking this up on Amazon, that the title has changed to The Human Phenomenon.
That's a different edition. Well, there are some slight differences in there. Nothing that would make a huge difference in the message of it.
I thought it was the same thing. All right. All right. Good.
Yeah, 6 one way, half dozen the other. But
Phenomenon of Man,
or the human phenomenon, right? And then the Divine Milieu, which is more of a spiritual treatise, in so much that he really goes inward in that and talks about very nuanced dynamics. Obviously shows you his Ignatian formation. These interdynamics of the spiritual life, which is again, because he's a scientist, he's always kind of incorporating that empirical language within it.
Right.
So for people who maybe say are more inclined to have mathematical, scientific brains, something like that. I think it would resonate with them. As like for me, when I was reading him, I was like, oh my God, this is taking me back to 7th grade science or whatever it was. This is like scratching that itch, Yeah. Phenomenon of Man, Divine Milieu, and then of course there are a number of great writers who have put out and still put out great the books and writings and articles and whatnot on Teilhard. So there's Sister Kathleen Duffy, and there's Sister Ilia Delio. Louis Ciferni just had a book come out recently, actually, where he looks at the human phenomenon.
Ciferni, I find his book on Teilhard and Love, but I discovered that he's got a whole series where he's really translating Teilhard in a way that's very, very accessible.
It is, yeah. He has a great gift that way. So. And then if people are interested in exploring more of that Teilhard universe, they can go to teilharddechardin.org. That's TeilhardDechardin. We'll put that.
I was going to say. These will be flashed on the screen.
Exactly. We'll put that on the bottom of the screen or in the show notes if you're listening. And that's for the American Teilhard Association. So that's all things Teilhard in the United States and even abroad that we try and connect with what's going on globally. And then I have a couple things coming up. I'll be presenting virtually. Ilia Delio's Center for Christogenesis, formerly known as the Omega Center. They have their December conference coming up, their annual conference. It's, of course, going to be virtual this year.
When is that?
It's the weekend of the, the 4th and 5th?
Yeah, because aren't you presenting here on the 5th?
So
are you locating? Have you reached a level of evolution where you can be in 2 places at the same time?
Not quite, no. I'm maybe getting that a little closer to that digitally, finding how I can maybe live stream in one, or whatever. But so I'll be presenting here for the late Norbertine Associates on Saturday. And then that'll be a virtual deal as well. And then on Monday and Tuesday, I'll be doing the Center for Christogenesis conference, which are 2 workshops. It's the same workshop twice. The second one's a different time for the people down under, I think.
Gotcha.
Yeah, on the other side of the world.
Good.
If you want to find me on Twitter, sometimes I post stuff on there, not as often as I should or like, but it's at theology_W_Dr. D. So theology with Dr. D. If you're looking for me there, and maybe a website will be coming soon. So, professionally, I think it might be good to get something together, right, for people to see online. We'll see what the future holds. So
good.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to say to the folks?
I'm grateful for you taking the reins today and kind of flipping the script here and taking me out of the driver's seat. Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure having you here, and there aren't a lot of people running around who I can talk to about Teilhard.
Likewise,
Yeah, it's nice to have a
especially every day at work,
a resident interlocutor.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm most grateful to be here at the Abbey. Like I said, it's been nothing but a good challenge so far, and I'm grateful for all the opportunities that just have unfolded and seem to be continuing to roll out here. So
Great. So we thank you for listening, watching, and keep your eye on Andrew Del Rossi and the Springhouse Media Ministry of the Abbey. There's a lot more good things to come.